Fostering connection through vulnerability, the People Pleaser podcast validates struggles, celebrates growth, and inspires positive change. Together, let's embrace authenticity, challenge patterns, and evolve with compassion. Back in action with another episode of the People Pleaser podcast. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure. And, on the people-pleasing front this week, I think I did pretty good. When you have to rack your brain, that means that you didn't send yourself into a bit of an anxious spiral of people-pleasing. Today's topic is asking for help, and I'm going to take a little bit of a roundabout way of getting there. So just trust that we will get to that topic, but there's a lot I want to say. So I recently shared my struggles with asking for help. I shared 3 examples where I really, really struggled to ask for help. And I thought it'd be a good topic to elaborate on because that was just kind of like my check-in. I didn't really dig into it. But I do want to just further the mutual understanding of that struggle. More and more, I'm realizing how lonely and isolated our world is becoming. I see it in myself. I see it in the clients I work with. I see it on social media. Because we do have this sense of connection online, which I don't want to minimize. It is still connection. However, it does seem that it has facilitated this retraction, this stepping away from quote unquote real life. I feel really fortunate that I've lived in a world that was way less tech heavy and more IRL in real life. However, we are very adaptive as humans, and even with my tech-free upbringing, I've adapted to this tech-obsessed world just like pretty much everyone else. I haven't necessarily seen or heard this firsthand, but I have heard through different social media channels that Gen Z is moving away from tech and opting for clunkier options to be more present and in the world, if you will. And what I heard specifically is that they are going back to flip phones to truly manually disconnect from the constant pull of social media and screens, which I think is just so interesting. I think we see this, through the generations where we kind of repeat ourselves a little bit. And to me, this speaks to just the overwhelm of the system that we currently are living in. And it's these younger generations, these younger folks who are like, wait a minute, they may have had it right a while ago. I myself find that I really do long for the simpler times. It does feel very nostalgic. It feels like I miss the simpler times. However, I haven't really found a path towards it that makes sense for the overly technological world that we live in. I don't know how to get back there with all the things that we now have. However, I did recently find this local Instagram account here in Victoria called Find Your Flock, and they're organizing local events to bring people together in community with a true intention of connection, which I absolutely love. I love that people are putting intentional efforts into creating community. I know that they hosted their first book swap night, so it was everybody brought their favorite book, and it was an evening of swapping books. And I know that they're about to host a second one, and I don't think I'll be able to make the second one. And truthfully, there's a little bit of nervousness that came up for me, but I do think this is something that I would absolutely love. So I want to stay connected to their socials and see what is in the future. I do think that I can lean into fear quite easily, which is an emotion or an experience that typically moves me away from community and into isolation. And what is that fear exactly? Probably rejection, probably silly insecurities that actually need connection in order to heal. I think that a lot of our healing happens on our own, but I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of the healing, like the other part of the healing, happens in real time when facing the fears or the struggles in environments that feel hard or scary or new or intimidating. I don't think healing can happen in a vacuum. I think it needs to happen in the world. Taking a fear-ridden or vulnerable experience and realizing that it's not as bad as we thought. Turning a negative into a positive, as they say. People are so much better than we give them credit for. And I do believe that most people are wonderful and amazing, and that we are all striving for the same feelings of connection and belonging. And this platform, this podcasting platform, is showing me that there are the more vulnerably I share, the more connections I form. I've been talking about body image and internalized shame and insecurities, and the more I talk about it, the more people are coming forward and sharing their own experiences with the same challenges. We're not alone. However, we're letting ourselves feel like we are. And I can bet that goes to any aspect of our human experience, anything and everything that we are going through or struggling with, someone can relate. And they're likely not very far away. This has been my approach to connection. I haven't ever really been afraid to lead with vulnerability and put myself out there. And I'm not really sure why, but even when Facebook was my main social media outlet, I tried to use it for building community and offering or asking for support. That comes really easily to me. Just these even though it's behind a screen, trying to use these screened spaces to find the human connection. And I do think that some of the greatest people that we can meet aren't necessarily in our immediate proximity, and that the internet has facilitated so many connections that we may have never had otherwise, or let's be honest, we probably would not have had otherwise. But I do still think that overly leaning on the screened out world for me has been not enough. It hasn't been sufficient. And if I'm being honest, it started to feel harder and harder to put myself totally out there, especially on social media, because I think we're using social media for different reasons these days. And I'll often put things out there and it's absolute crickets. And that can be discouraging, but I do know it's not personal. I think collectively we have become desensitized to social media, and that our brains and our hearts can only offer so much on a given day. So for example, this weekend I was hey, would love to hear your ideas on episode topics. And I imagine that people like my podcast, listen to it and think, oh, I wish she would cover that. Or, read that little thing and thought, oh, I would love for her to cover this topic. But the reality is that nobody responded. I just think there's so much else going on in our lives on a day-to-day, or when we're on social media, we're just kind of taking a breather. We're not really wanting to output. We're just wanting to kind of consume mindlessly. At least if I'm speaking from my own experience, that is often how I'm using social media. And so my request for topic ideas is just really low on the hierarchy of needs for folks. And I get that. But when I'm trying to put that out there, it is an effort to build a connection between you, your ideas, what's important to you, and what I then can create, because that then facilitates connection. Then you and we have an avenue for connection. So that's where that comes from. And I actually try to make my requests really minimal, because I'm aware that we all have so much on our plates. And I also think that people get a little bit nervous to be hey, people pleaser podcast. I'd like to talk about this really sensitive topic. So I get it. Just using that as an example. And because social media is shifting, I do think that's why we're seeing people move out of the online spaces and back into in real life. And I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that can be really hard. Like that can be intimidating. And even when I think about the Find Your Flock group, like I think that I would go there and feel like really great and like really connected. But I also think that I'd be nervous. I'd be a little insecure. Now I've seen like some of the pictures and I've seen like who's going and I'm like, I don't know any of these people. And so there's just that whole piece of just being vulnerable. But what I'm really trying to remind myself is that vulnerability is not a lack of safety. And I actually trust myself in my vulnerability. Like I trust that I can still be safe in my vulnerability, and that is like building connection and putting myself out there and finding these social connections. That's actually a type of vulnerability that I feel quite secure in, which is kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but it's true. Like I can be there and be a little bit uncomfortable and still be safe. I can be there and be shy. I can be there and like maybe not talk as much as I wanted to because I don't really know who to talk to or how to start a conversation with like new people. But also it's okay for me to just kind of hang back and observe, or like find someone who is presenting in a similar way as me and lean into that connection. So the vulnerability of building connection, I would say, is a safe vulnerability. And, there are obviously different levels to that in terms of like where you're putting yourself out there and in what type of settings. But in this case, I think like there's really nothing to lose and only something to gain. So I have two examples from my own life that I want to share as a way of hopefully shedding a bit of positive light on building community and this first example is about like asking for help or like asking for something. So the first example is about my grandma. And so a few months ago, I asked my grandma if she would be willing to knit me a Norwegian sweater, which felt like a really big ask. My grandmother just turned 80 and she is the keeper of our family's like history and ancestry, specific to our Scandinavian and Norwegian ancestry. She has shared our Norwegian culture with us over the years in many different ways. And as kids, she knit all of her grandchildren Norwegian sweaters. But unfortunately, as a kid, I did not appreciate the absolute treasure that was this hand knit sweater. And as I've grown older, I've started to really consider my grandma's legacy. And I do believe her knitting and her connection to our family history and all that she has shared with us is her legacy. So I somewhat sheepishly asked her if she would be willing to knit me a sweater, fully knowing the size of that ask. But she, without hesitation, said yes and started the process of knitting this intricate Norwegian sweater immediately. And so over the last couple months, I would go to her house like quite often for measurements. And honestly, I was a little bit sad when the sweater was finished because I really enjoyed the process of connecting with her regularly. There was, however, this feeling of guilt that showed up. Now that she's knit me this sweater, I felt indebted to her in some kind of way, but I didn't really know what that entailed exactly because like it wasn't that we had made that arrangement that like it was transactional, but I brought this up with my therapist because I realized that like I do have this association with gift giving and it feeling transactional. You give me something and I'm now expected to give you something in return. And my therapist shared the perspective that perhaps the process in itself was the gift to my grandma. When I shared that I didn't understand, my therapist told me that I was the gift. The experience with me was the gift. And this made me bawl because I in no way felt like my presence was enough to be considered a gift. That just like flew right over my head. My therapist had to work her ass off to like get me to a place where I could consider that the quality time with me, the connection in the experience, and the way in which I showed that I valued my grandmother's talents and connection to our family history and heritage was the gift. Trust me, y'all, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but I think that I have mostly found acceptance with the idea. And my therapist also made the parallel, like I've told her time and time again that like connection is like such a core value of me. And she's like, why would you think that's not the same for your grandma? Like maybe your grandma also values that connection as a core value. So since the sweater has completed, I've already found ways to go and visit my grandma. And my takeaway is that there doesn't need to be a project on the go in order for me to go visit. And in our visits, I now feel so much more connected to like what is going on in my grandparents' lives and they in mine, which is such a gift. And just like, it's so amazing. Like after the sweater was done, you know, it's now been like, I don't know, maybe 2 months. And in these visits, I have been telling her all about like my immigration process and how I have to go to Montreal for my interview. And my grandma was like, I want to use all my travel points to get you like a discount on your flights to Montreal. Like, it's just amazing. Like I, again, really struggled to accept that because again, like my heart is just like shattering into a million pieces. She feels connected to my immigration process and she now wants to be a part of it. She wants to like support me and the flight. It's just like amazing. It's just so incredibly wonderful. And I haven't even fully accepted that it's all happening. It's a true gift. My second example is in regard to building community, and it's something that my mom shared with me yesterday. When we were growing up, we knew a lot of families on our street, most of which had kids of their own and were like mine and my siblings' ages. So then as a result, our parents knew a lot of their parents. And there seemed to be like a good number of glory days where there was a real sense of community on our street. Like you knew everyone on your street. And as the years progressed, a lot of us kids grew up and moved out. And as a result, a lot of the families moved. And I remember one day my mom told me that she barely knew any of their neighbors anymore. And she shared that people don't even really interact when they see each other on the street. Yesterday, when I was visiting my mom and I was picking raspberries from her yard, she just like kind of haphazardly said that several people in the neighborhood were now growing her raspberries. And that's because she has given away so many shoots of her raspberry plants over the years. And I just thought that was so beautiful. Like my mom is trying to kind of do what I'm doing on social media, but like in real life, like putting out these free raspberry shoots on the front lawn and people are taking them. And like just these gifts, these like selfless gifts of like sharing something that she has too much of and building community. And then in addition to those raspberry plants, my stepdad has in recent years took on the project of grafting apple trees from the two like over 100-year-old apple trees in their front yard. And essentially grafting is when you take like a small shoot from your apple tree and you attach it to another branch and you grow an apple tree. I hope you know what grafting means because that explanation was really horrible. But essentially he made apple trees with his apple tree, like not from seed. And his whole purpose of this like very rigorous and sensitive process was to share the apple trees with friends and neighbors and family. So now not only do my parents' neighbors have raspberry plants from my mom and apple trees from my stepdad, but they also have a connection to my mom and stepdad. And I just think that's a beautiful opportunity to build community and offers like an opportunity to connect. It's like, that's their opener. My mission is to keep listening to my pulls towards community, even when sometimes my pulls towards comfort and solitude are a little bit louder and a little bit stronger. I have to trust that I will give myself downtime when I need it, but I really need to remind myself that I thrive in community and that we do need each other to have our needs met. One thing that I know is that I can easily just watch social media from an outside perspective and not really engage. So I do want to be more intentional with how I navigate that space. And I also want to support others who are working hard to build safety and connection online as well. I want to put myself out there in real life, whether it's through reaching out to friends or participating in events. Really, it's just a matter of putting myself out there in the world. Like, never has that really gone wrong. And it's just about like trying until you just find something that clicks. I want to finish with this fun little like community rich experience I had today. I went to the Pride Parade here in Victoria, which is always such a feel-good event. I think everyone walks away with a bit of a spring in their step. And I was walking home and I was crossing a crosswalk. And so there was a car stopped at the light waiting for the crosswalk. And this car was blasting Adele, and both the driver and the passenger were belting it out like at the top of their lungs. So then both me and the people crossing the crosswalk towards me all joined in, and we were all singing Adele together in the middle of the street. And next thing you know, like we all went our separate ways, but we all left smiling and laughing and like guaranteed feeling great about just that little human interaction. They're everywhere if you let them. Once again, this is Corie with the People Pleaser Podcast. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. And if you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can find daily content from me on both Instagram and TikTok. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next episode.